It's kind of like if the TV shows Handmaid's Tale and Alias had a baby, and that TV baby grew up to be a movie pretending to be Russian. That's right, today we'll be talking about Red Sparrow, the 2018 espionage thriller directed by Francis Lawrence, written by Justin Haythe, and starring Jennifer Lawrence as Dominika. Red Sparrow is for sure rated R for strong violence, sexual content, language, torture, and some graphic nudity. So in this nitty-gritty review, I'm going to be going through every category of my grid, talking about what worked for me and what didn't with this movie. This will contain a bunch of spoilers, so if you want something spoiler-free, be sure to check out my itty-bitty review. Now that that's out of the way, the first category of my grid is going to be writing, plot, and genre. Now I have to admit right off the bat that when it comes to movies like espionage thrillers, I'm not the best at being able to follow the plot. I'm definitely the kind of person that has an easier time following a simpler story told in a really complex way, like Memento or Inception, than I am at following a more complex story told in a simple way, like Red Sparrow or most other espionage thrillers. So that said, I didn't necessarily feel confused as I watched it, but then when the movie's over and I take a step back and try to analyze the plot structure, I have a little bit of a difficult time. I just kind of remember, the bigger picture. So in that regard, the plot structure seemed pretty solid, but for all I know, there could be a bunch of gaping plot holes that, upon a second viewing, become much more obvious. And this movie is definitely the type of movie where the plot drives the character more than the character drives the plot. Even though Dominika is definitely a very intelligent woman with a lot more agency than you usually see in particularly female characters in movies like this. I did like that Dominika's outer goal throughout the movie was pretty much to find a way out. She wasn't particularly loyal to Russia and didn't really seem to care too much about America. It was definitely more of a, I found myself in this situation, how do I get free? So I liked that throughout the movie, and that seemed like a really fresh take that it, she wasn't really politically tied to either side. But then by the end of the movie, pretty much just became Russia bad, America good, she's gonna help the Americans. That just seems like a weak decision to me. I would have liked to see just more ambiguity or more selfishness, I guess, on her part. I think that would have made a more interesting character. I also thought there were a lot of missed opportunities within the plot, and even just the way the genre tropes and conventions were used when it comes to things like social and political commentary. This is definitely a movie that feels like it's trying to be more of a social commentary about the way women are exploited and the way they're used by society and even the government in this case. And there were some interesting opportunities to be more of a commentary on that exploitation, but then it was just told in such a way that it felt exploitative at the same time. And I really think that, this is one of those movies where a female viewpoint would have been really beneficial. Not to say that men aren't capable of, making that kind of a social commentary, but I think it's just a little bit more difficult, or, you just need some sort of personal experience or, do a lot of research, that kind of thing, which, again, not at all impossible for a man to do, but I really don't think that's what happened in this case. It just seemed like there was a little bit of a distance from the real issues that, most women and other people in society as well, but, that women face in societies around the world as far as exploitation and the way they're seen and the way they're treated. So, it really could have done something, could have had a really powerful message as far as exploitation and finding empowerment within an exploitative world. It was almost there, and I think if they had just had, some sort of female viewpoint, be it director, writer, editor, cinematographer, someone in there, if they just had a female viewpoint, someone creative in there to kind of help toe that line a little bit between social commentary on exploitation and exploitative, I think that could have helped steer it closer to this line instead of closer to just being exploitative. So that was just something that, kind of bothered me throughout the movie. And there were some pretty empowering moments with Jennifer Lawrence's character. But then it also, more often than not, just felt exploitative and just kind of gross. So that was definitely something within the plot, and even just the way the genre conventions were used, that could have been done a lot better. So the total score for plot and genre is going to be a 6.6 out of 10, which is still good, but getting a little bit closer to that mediocre range. I consider good to start at a 6.0 and end at a 7.9. I just really didn't do anything particularly interesting or new, just a lot of missed opportunities overall. So the next category is going to be writing characters. The characters were pretty well developed overall. You get pretty good vibes, even within the first scenes where characters are introduced, of just who these characters are and what they're capable of. With the character of Dominika, she does some pretty unlikable things. Early on in the movie, without that provocation of, being forced into it, we see her pretty brutally nearly kill a couple, and yes, they wronged her very severely before that, but it really doesn't justify what she did even a little bit. So we see what she's capable of, before there's any intervention from the state. I mean, it was like the complete opposite of a save the cat moment. And then when it comes to her inner needs, I really didn't feel like she had much of an emotional journey, which is really a missed opportunity because she has so much happens to her, and she there's so much potential for change and a solid arc. And I really didn't feel like she changed at all. I mean, like I said, we see what she's capable of at the beginning of the movie, and that really doesn't change too much from what we see, what she's capable of at the end of the movie. And the only difference is at the beginning of the movie, it was spur of the moment rage, whereas by the end of the movie, when we see her take down her uncle, it's, this long drawn out act of revenge. So, there is a big difference, but it's still, she's brutal at the beginning and she's brutal at the end. So we don't really see her, she really doesn't go through that much of a change. And even when she goes to Sparrow School, I thought that was going to be a much bigger portion of the movie. And I just thought she was going to have more of an arc at Sparrow School. I thought she was going to be tested a little bit more, and she obviously does go through some stuff, and we do see, when she's first there and she's told to undress and she doesn't, and then by the end she completely undresses and, shows the man who tried to rape her that, he wanted power, he didn't want sex. And so, that was actually one of the more empowering moments in the movie for me, even though that was the moment with the most graphic nudity, and in a lot of ways I could understand if people saw that scene as being exploitative. It was a very uncomfortable scene, and yet you see her playing this guy. She knows what he wants, and she's not going to give it to him. Throughout the whole movie, she really doesn't give people what they want. She knows what they want, and then flips it on him. You see her do it time and again throughout the movie. And also, just on a quick note with the dialogue, I know this is somewhat of a nitpicky thing, but it did really bother me that just everybody was speaking English. Nobody was in a country where anybody spoke English, and everybody just spoke English. Like, I get it, but at the same time, it definitely contributed to that emotional detachment from the characters, because it just felt superficial and fake. I thought that was worth noting, even though it's a pretty nitpicky thing in the grand scheme of things. On one last quick note with the characters, Nate was just an awful CIA agent through and through. I think at one point they even say, oh, he's a great CIA agent, one of the best, but he made one dumb mistake in the park. And then throughout the whole movie, he's just making dumb mistakes. He meets this girl and instantly is like, oh man, no, she's gonna be, we're gonna convert her and recruit her. She's gonna be a spy. It's gonna be great. That's so stupid. Like, why would he think that was a good idea? And then what's even stupider is that he was right when the movie would have been a lot more interesting if she did turn on him and she was loyal to the Russians the whole time. I think that would have been a more interesting movie than having her turn for no apparent reason and become a spy for America. And then the fact that Dominika and Nate fell in love or whatever, it just felt really like one of those things that the studio at the very end was like, oh no, there needs to be a love story, and they threw it in real quick. Like, it just felt really unnatural, really superficial. I did not care for that aspect of the script at all, and I really don't understand why it even needed to be there. I think it would have been, again, more interesting if either she completely turned on him or if their relationship was just completely platonic. Because that would have given him more reason to trust her if he knows that she's a sparrow and that she's trained to seduce and get what she wants that way. Why would he trust her at all once she starts sleeping with it? It just made no sense. It was so stupid. So I really disliked that aspect of the script and just that the characterization and just the relationships going on there, just all of it. It just didn't really make any sense and was just really, really shallow, and yeah, I didn't care for that aspect of the script. The total score for the writing characters section is going to be slightly lower than the plot genre. It's going to be a 6.4 out of 10. Which again, even more so than genre, getting pretty close to that mediocre range. Just a lot of missed opportunities, and definitely there was that just emotional gap between me as an audience member and the characters, and I just wish that gap had been closed a little bit more. The next category in the grid is going to be acting and casting. As far as Jennifer Lawrence goes, I thought she did a really good job throughout. As much as as many issues as I had with this movie, I'll admit that she was really good. That said, I should put a disclosure out there that I am, I don't know if tone deaf is quite the right word, but when it comes to accents, I'm awful at being able to tell if it's good or bad. I'm really bad at determining where an accent is from, and I'm really bad at being able to hear when an accent sounds really authentic and when it's not. So in that regard, I haven't gone out of my way to look and see what other people are saying about it. So if it's a bad Russian accent, I'm sorry. I believe you if you tell me it is. So I thought she did a good job, but that's my disclaimer. And that's true really with all of the actors, because I don't think any of them were actually Russian. I think that's really odd. This is a whole movie that takes place in Russia, featuring Russian characters, and it really didn't look like anybody was actually Russian, which I just think is an odd casting choice. I mean, I understand why you would cast someone like Jennifer Lawrence in the lead, gets people in the seats, so that makes sense, but to have all the secondary characters also still not Russian, that whole thing, it just felt, again, just something that distanced me. So in that regard, I thought the casting could have been a little bit more Russian, I guess, and it just seemed like some odd choices. But I did think everybody did a good job throughout, both with line deliveries and just facial expressions and reaction shots. There were a few people here and there, some pretty minor characters that had some pretty stiff line deliveries. That was an issue here and there. But as far as the main players, I thought everyone did a pretty solid job. So the total score for acting and casting is going to be a 6.8 out of 10, which is pretty solidly good. It's definitely getting a little bit more away from that mediocre range than we saw in either of the writing categories, but it's still not doing anything super great. And for as good as Jennifer Lawrence was, there were enough faults within the acting and casting of everyone else that, definitely, like I said, didn't get pushed into that great range, but is solidly good. So the next category is going to be lighting. And when it comes to the lighting of the movie, I kind of don't have too much to say about it. It was definitely beautiful throughout and definitely had that feel of, a high budget Hollywood movie. So nothing looked bad by any means, and it definitely, it did a good job of setting the mood when it needed to and definitely maintaining a sense of realism throughout, which for a movie like this, you don't want to go too far into the non-realistic route. So definitely did a good job when it comes to mood and realism. And everything was also just very beautiful throughout. Nothing totally exceptional, nothing that, really stood out as, wow, that was an amazing shot, nothing like that, but pretty solidly good. When it comes to the storytelling aspects, I didn't, at least with the first viewing, nothing stood out as, being anything too out of the ordinary as far as how lighting plays into the storytelling. So that was pretty mediocre there, but all the other regards were pushed a little bit farther up into the good and even great range at times. But yeah, nothing really specific that I can point to and say, that one scene was really good, or, oh, did you notice what they did there? It just really wasn't that kind of movie, at least with the first viewing, for me. So, not a ton to talk about there, but it looked good throughout. So total score for lighting is going to be a 6.6 out of 10, which is good. So the next category is going to be camera work. And I thought this was pretty easily the strongest point in the movie, although still nothing really pushed into that great range. There was, a nice oneer that had some interesting camera angles in it as well. And it's the scene where Dominika's uncle comes and, is talking to her about, what are your plans? I can help you. He gives her the tape recorder. So that whole scene where they walk from the entryway into the kitchen, she's going to make tea. There was just some interesting, like I said, it was a oneer, and then you have some shots that are more looking, down, looking up at them, which, kind of gives like an ominous presence, but equally to both of them, which is interesting. So there's just some interesting power dynamics at play within the camera work of that scene. And that's true throughout the whole movie, particularly with the character of Dominika. Just the way she's framed with other characters really tells you a lot about the power that she's able to have over people by, her ability of knowing what people want and how she can manipulate that want into her own goals without actually giving them what they want. So the camera work did play into that pretty well throughout, particularly more so with the framing of shots than anything else. But yeah, so overall, like, the camera work was pretty solid. Aside from that oneer, though, there's really not a whole lot. Again, nothing really I can point to as solid examples. At least with the first viewing, that was really the only scene that particularly stood out. But throughout, it was a well shot movie. So the total score for the camera work is going to be a 7.8. Which is definitely, very solidly good and getting very close to that great range, which for me starts at an 8.0. So it's really bordering on being great, but is still held back just a little bit, just because it just doesn't quite do enough that's new or interesting or memorable. At least with the first viewing. If I ever go back and see it again, there might be more that stands out, especially since this is, one of those types of movies where, once you've seen the end, you have a better grasp of the character dynamics and the, where the plot is going and all of that. There's probably more going on within each frame than meets the eye with the first view. So especially, like I was saying, within those power dynamics and the way things are shot. So I do think that would be one benefit for rewatching this movie, even though I kind of don't have a ton of interest in rewatching it. But if I ever do go back and rewatch it, I think this would be the category most likely to see an improvement, I think. So the next category is going to be editing and special effects. Overall, I thought the editing was pretty solid. I particularly like at the beginning when we see the cross-cutting going on between Nate in the park and Dominika while she's dancing. I thought there was just some interesting, comparisons and dichotomies going on between their movements that did a good job of connecting their storylines from the very beginning. As much as I liked those cross-cuts and that, that connection that's formed between them from the very beginning, I did kind of feel like the movie as a whole really relied too heavily on that visual connection to make us feel like these characters are actually connected when they're not. Like I was saying within the character section, I just really didn't feel like they actually had any kind of meaningful relationship. And the movie kind of plays it off like we're supposed to believe they fell in love by the end, and that's just kind of silly. So that's definitely a fault that I found with the movie overall, but as far as the editing goes, I did really like the way those scenes were cross-edited, and I thought that was a good start to forming that kind of connection between them, but then the movie just didn't go any further with it than that, which is a shame. I did have a little bit of an issue with the pacing, but I think that comes more with the script than with the editing. It just kind of felt like a slow movie overall, despite the fact that there was a lot happening. But overall, I did think that the editing was pretty solid throughout. So I gave the editing a 6.6 out of 10, which is good. So the next category in the grid is going to be sound design. I really don't have anything particularly to say about this category. I think particularly coming off the heels of Annihilation, where the sound design was so amazing and such a part of the story, and I could go on a whole rant about that again, but I won't. If you're interested, you can check out my Annihilation reviews. I talk about it in both the Itty Bitty review, if you're looking for something spoiler-free, and the Nitty Griddy review if you've already seen the movie. But that aside, coming off of that movie where the sound design was so incredible, and then coming to this movie, it's not that it does anything bad, it was just pretty standard. Everything sounded really good, but nothing really did anything different or particularly effective when it comes to the storytelling. It's pretty much just what you would expect from a big budget Hollywood movie, and nothing more, nothing less. So I gave the sound design overall a 6.8 out of 10, which is pretty solidly good. Like I said, nothing really bad, nothing great, just good. So the next category is going to be aesthetics, and what I mean by aesthetics is going to be, I divide it up into character aesthetics, which is hair, makeup, and costumes, and environmental aesthetics, which is sets, props, and locations. And with this movie, I thought everything looked good. The costumes were really good, definitely on the exploitative side of things, which fits the story really well. I just wish, like I said before, that it had been more of a social commentary about the exploitation as opposed to just being exploitative, but that's really more an issue of the script than of the, anything with the costumes. So while they were obviously very revealing throughout the movie, I thought that it was appropriate to the story, and in that regard, I thought the costumes were well done. I thought the props throughout the movie were really good as well, although I did have a little bit of confusion because everything looked very, especially the technology looked very outdated, very 90s, but then there's a mention early on in the movie about how Americans love their social media, which makes me think it takes place in present day. So I was a little bit confused as to when this movie was supposed to take place. So that was a little bit of just a disconnect for me, where it almost felt like Archer, where I was like, wait, but what time period are we in? I liked the sets throughout. I thought they were really well done, but similar to a lot of the other categories, nothing really stood out as particularly great. There's not one particular set that I can point to and say that was my favorite. It was just pretty solid throughout. Everything looked nice, without really going too above and beyond or getting pushed into the great range by any means. So that's pretty much the aesthetics category as a whole. So for the aesthetics overall, I gave it a 7.3 out of 10, which is definitely solidly good. But like I said, nothing pushes it into that great range. Like pretty much every category in the movie, it's just sort of held back by just doesn't really push itself at all to go above and beyond or to really stand out from other movies. So next category is going to be impact on film, and this one I divide up into 3 separate subcategories. There's going to be critical impact, audience or cult impact, and historical or inspirational impact. So for critical impact, I just looked to the Metacritic score for Red Sparrow, which as of the recording of this review was, I believe, a 5.3. So I chose to round it down to a 5 out of 10, just because this movie really doesn't stand a chance at being one that, critics are going to talk about years from now. This isn't going to be the kind of movie mentioned in like a film studies textbook, not something people are going to study in film school. So that's why I decided to round down to a 5 instead of up to a 5.5, just because I really don't see it having that lasting impact. So for audience and cult impact, I kind of just looked at a couple different audience scores and just kind of averaged them together and looked at it that way. So I looked at the cinema score, the IMDb average user rating, and the Rotten Tomato audience score, and just sort of combined those scores and averaged them out, and I came up with a 6.5 out of 10 for Red Sparrow, which seemed a little generous to me. This kind of seems like a movie that, just kind of glancing at reviews, most people seem to think it's pretty mediocre, but looking at those scores, that seemed to be kind of what it averaged out to, so I went with that for now, but like I said, with the critical impact, I just don't see this movie as having any kind of lasting impact. I could be wrong, but that's my prediction. I think it's going to be one we probably won't remember a year or two from now. So the last score is going to be historical and inspirational impact, and for this one I gave it a 1 out of 10, mostly just because I do think this could be the kind of movie that, it might be interesting to look back on in 20 or 30 years, similar to the way, we look back on 80s movies that have Cold War themes, just because of the political climate and just political events going on right now, and how the U.S. and Russia relations, so it could be interesting in that regard. So I gave it 1 point, but in the grand scheme of things, like I keep saying, I just don't see it as having any kind of lasting impact, and certainly I don't think it's going to be the kind of movie that will inspire people in any way. So that's kind of my prediction. Really don't think it's going to have much, if any, of an inspirational impact. tiny historical, not necessarily historical impact, but historical context, I think, at least, that might be interesting looking back on. So I gave it 1 point just for that. And the last category in my grid is going to be overall enjoyment. And for Red Sparrow, I gave it a 5 out of 10, which is mediocre. I didn't hate it, but it's definitely not a movie that I loved. And it is one of those movies where, I kind of had mixed feelings walking out of the theater, and then the more I think about it after, the less I like it. And I think a big part of it, for me at least, is going to be that dichotomy between feeling like a social commentary about exploitation and then just being exploitative. It really tried to walk that line and just ended up on the wrong side of it, which really hindered my overall enjoyment, particularly in hindsight. The more I think about it, the less I like the movie overall. Even though it did have, it had moments I liked. But that said, it's not an awful movie. I'm not dying to see it again or anything. It's definitely not going to be one I buy when it comes out on home release. But it's not the kind of movie that I would refuse to ever watch again. I would definitely be careful who I picked to watch it with, as it is a very uncomfortable movie. Don't go see it with your parents would be my number one advice, I suppose. But yeah, it's not a comfortable movie. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Look at movies like Requiem for a Dream, or pretty much any Darren Aronofsky movie for that matter. Some of my favorites, but extremely uncomfortable. So that's not necessarily why I gave it such a low rating. It just didn't resonate with me. Felt a little too exploitative, and just, it's not my genre, to be fair, as well. I'm just not the biggest espionage fan, so that definitely played a part in my overall enjoyment. So there's just a lot of factors working against this movie, for me at least, that just kind of contributed to me giving it just a 5 out of 10 overall. It was just kind of meh. So normally this would be the point in the review where I talk about any extra credit that I gave, but this is a movie that I really didn't really find anything to give extra credit for, so 0 points for extra credit. So the overall score for Red Sparrow is going to be a 64.07, which, like pretty much every category throughout, is good, but bordering on mediocre. There are definitely things like the likability of Jennifer Lawrence's character and Jennifer Lawrence's strength as an actress in general that kept this movie from getting pushed back to that mediocre range, but it's really on the border, and it's just, technically I would still consider this a good movie, but it's on the low end of good for sure. As far as recommendations go, I would say if you are a fan of Jennifer Lawrence, this, you might as well go see it. It's not awful. It is uncomfortable at times. So if you don't like uncomfortable movies, don't go see it. I mentioned at the top why this movie is rated R, and it's definitely, this is a hard R movie, and even within just the general descriptors of things like sexual content, it's not just that it's sexual content that makes it uncomfortable. So there's a lot of non-consensual sex, or just a lot of just uncomfortable and upsetting situations. So if that kind of stuff bothers you, this is definitely not the one to see. And unlike, say, Aronofsky's movies, most of his movies at least, I just didn't really feel like there was too much of a point to the uncomfortableness. Again, if it had been more of a social commentary about the way women are exploited, that could have been interesting and really powerful, and it just missed the mark. There was a lot of opportunity, they got really close to that opportunity, and then backed way off. But Jennifer Lawrence is good in it, so if you're a fan of hers, and you don't think that the hard R rating is going to bother you, I would recommend it. And of course, if you're a fan of the, the espionage, spy, thriller genre, this probably isn't the best one ever. I haven't seen enough to say for sure if this would be a great one to see. And judging by the audience and critic scores, kind of seems like everybody's pretty much in the same boat as far as not thinking it's the best in the world. But if you like the genre, you might as well check it off your list. But other than that, if you're not a fan of Jennifer Lawrence, if you don't like the genre, particularly if you don't like either of those things, this is easily one to skip. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about Red Sparrow. So I guess that's it for now. I will see you next week when I talk about A Wrinkle in Time. Hey, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe to Griddy Films on YouTube by pressing this button. Also, like and share this video. You can follow Griddy Films on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for new video announcements, entertainment news, fun pics, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.